Could you tell us about how long you've been a nurse and what happened after these laws were introduced?
Yeah, so I've been a nurse probably about 4.5 years now, and I was working before these laws were introduced, and saw lots of different things in that time regarding the procedures and abortions and things like that. But after these laws were introduced in 2022, I was there for the first late-term abortion that we had done at the hospital after the laws had come in, and I was just there to see and witness the effect that it had on the medical teams and everyone looking after this woman and completing this procedure and involved in the day, and just how that affected and how that sort of switched people from before the laws were introduced to after. Their thinking switched, and just the reality that this is something that actually happens and that they would do to a baby and to a woman.
Could we step out exactly what that looked like? I know it's quite traumatic probably for you to recall it, but I think when we spoke, you said that this happened around November, December 2022, so a couple of months after the introduction.
Yes, it was. So it was at the end of November, at the end of 2022, and it was the first time many of us had heard of the law actually coming in and taking effect and having that effect on the procedures that were happening. And so it was within the few months after the law was introduced. It did not take long at all.
Up until that point, you hadn't done late-term abortions on healthy babies, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So how old was this baby?
This baby was 25 weeks old when it was killed in utero and delivered stillborn.
So what was the process? How did you guys come to be dealing with this?
For us, it was presented to us as just any other surgical termination, and for us it meant looking after this patient beforehand and the nurses having to sign off and administer medications before the procedure that began the whole process, and then looking after this patient afterwards and having to review the op report and seeing how certain medications were injected into this baby's heart to stop the baby from heart from beating. Okay. And then the baby was delivered, and the mother still had to deliver that baby and still had to recover after the procedure and just walk out. And for us, it was just such a shock, I think, because this woman was coming in with a 25-week-old baby that would have been gestationally viable outside of the womb. And I think the big shock was in most of the nurses that looked after this patient. These nurses have had miscarriages and premature babies and stillbirths themselves, and all of a sudden there was this viable baby being killed and delivered stillborn that we just couldn't do anything about.
Yeah, and did the midwives that delivered that baby, what was it like for them?
They were shocked. I think the entire theatre team, everyone who was involved in the care and in this procedure was just absolutely shocked, I think, that it could actually happen. Just seeing it happen, seeing it come to reality, something that they'd only heard whispers about, I think was just, it was just so difficult for them.
What happened to the baby? So they deliver this stillborn baby, what happens next?
It's just discarded as medical waste. The baby isn't given a funeral or a death certificate or anything. It's just discarded as another byproduct of a procedure, and the woman just carries on.
So this 25-week-old baby was whisked away after being delivered stillborn and just dumped in the medical waste bin.
Yeah. Sometimes with these sorts of procedures, sometimes specimens are sent off for pathology, for testing or things like that, and that's sort of the last we hear of that. But other than that, it's just discarded. Anything else.
Wow. So on the one hand, in your hospital ward, you're delivering these babies prematurely and doing everything you can to
Yeah.
save their lives.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you're delivering intentionally healthy, viable babies stillborn and dumping them in the bin.
Yeah.
What does that do to the nurses and the midwives and the doctors? What toll does it take?
It is such a big toll. As it is, we have to change our personality and change our whole demeanour between each patient that we look after. And when you walk into one room, you have to switch. You have to switch off from your previous patient and switch on. But the fact that we were asked to have to pretend like this was okay, to have to sign off on things, it was just like everyone was speechless. No one knew what to say. No one wanted to be involved.
Were people angry?
They were angry. They were angry that I think also that they didn't know that this could actually happen, first of all. They were just angry at that and just angry at why someone would be allowed to do this to a perfectly healthy baby from a perfectly healthy mother as well. I think that's just really, really difficult. And all the details of that stick with me to this day, as I'm sure they do for every other nurse and midwife involved in caring for them.
Are South Australian midwives and nurses and doctors scared about speaking up about this?
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think even before late-term abortion was on the cards, it was something that was already kept extremely quiet. But even with this on the cards, I think it's just such a risk to your career, to the people that you work with, even knowing that you would want to talk about it or want to disagree with it. It's almost, you don't want to be that person, but someone has to be.
What happened to the mother after she delivered that baby at 25 weeks stillborn?
The mother recovered from her procedure and was sent home.
Wow.
As if nothing had happened.
Wow. The trauma for her.
And I think I've seen so many women come out of termination procedures and having an abortion and seeing the trauma, seeing just how emotional they are, which you can understand why, and it's that sort of, they can't go back.
So do you think it's healthcare?
It's not healthcare. That's not why I became a nurse. That's not why each of these women or each of these professionals became midwives or doctors or nurses. My job is to use evidence-based approaches to look after people well and to save lives and to keep people healthy. And so it goes against everything that I and everything that any other nurse has ever been taught. I think when you've got a perfectly healthy mother and a perfectly healthy baby, why does it have to be one or the other? My job is to care for these people, these humans, and to show compassion and advocate for them. But when there's actually a real solution and a real way to advocate for them, why aren't I able to do that?
We could deliver these babies alive at
Exactly.
25 weeks. Instead of injecting that baby's heart with potassium chloride, the tragedy is we could have just delivered that baby alive.
Exactly.
And the mother wouldn't have had to be there for that. She just delivers the baby and the
Yeah.
same thing, she recovers and goes home, and the baby goes to the neonatal intensive care ward and the baby then receives care. So it is possible in late-term abortion to get that win-win outcome for the mother. She gets her body back, the pregnancy is terminated, but the baby is given care and survives. And, do you think for midwives and nurses that would be a much better outcome?
Definitely, and I think the really tricky part of all of this is that as professionals who've spent so much time and effort learning this, we are skilled and we have the resources to be able to do it, to be able to care for these babies, and to just ensure that they have the best chance at life. We have the resources and the skills to do that. So I think it just hurts so much that we aren't allowed to, we aren't empowered to do that when we are so easily able to.
So you were involved in one of the first late-term abortions in South Australia of a healthy baby in late 2022. What happened next after the shock and the anger that the midwives and nurses had? What did the hospital do?
Because of how the procedure was approached and planned, it had such a shock on everyone involved, and everyone just felt a little bit blindsided because it was such a new thing, and they didn't realise that it could happen. And so the whole process, from what I understand, went through a bit of a review because they had just decided that they couldn't have that happen every time. The shock and the trauma and everyone being horrified was not something that they could have happen regularly when they had planned to have these procedures completed. And so from what I understand, they were looking at changing the policy and have changed the policy and the process of how it happens to almost brush it under the rug a little bit, push it through a different way so that less people have contact with the woman and less people are involved in the care to cause less of a fuss.
Yeah.
And they've definitely changed their processes on how they do that to make it, because it's such a common thing, they couldn't have that happening every single time.
Well, that was one of the first healthy babies to be killed by the abortion up to birth laws, but since then there's now been over 45. So that's of December 2023. It doesn't even include the 2024 figures, but we know over 45 healthy, viable babies have been killed in this way. Your ward dealt with one of the first, and I do understand that from other sources that they have swept this under the rug, that the procedure, the injection of potassium chloride is happening in secret with very few people involved. And then these women are being sent to Flinders, is what I understand, and delivering these babies stillborn. But the nurses and midwives who are delivering these stillborn babies, they it's being covered up what's really going on.
Definitely. And I really feel for them because it's such a difficult thing to be a part of and to have to be a part of so regularly. Just the once for us was enough to show the effect that it can have on the people caring for these patients and wanting to care for these babies.
Yeah. Is there anything else that I haven't asked that you'd like to share?
Honestly, I think just we talk so much about how it affects the mother and how it affects the baby, of course, and everything else, which are such important things to value and to consider. But I think so often it's overlooked. The people who are tasked to care for these cases and to perform these abortions and killing babies, viable, healthy babies. And I think there's so much to consider because it has such a deep effect. This is years later and I can remember every detail. It has such a deep effect on how you think about and process these things, and just, this isn't healthcare. We just want to be able to do our jobs and do them well and to look after people and love people well. And this is not allowing us to. And it's causing so much harm for us as healthcare professionals. This isn't why we did it. This isn't why we spend our time studying, and this isn't why we continue to learn and to do what we do.
Did midwives and nurses cry about this?
Definitely. I think we're all humans, and so each of us has our own things going on. So when you have a nurse looking after someone having a termination and a late-term abortion, that's a nurse who has likely had a miscarriage or a stillbirth or has delivered a baby or has had a premature baby herself. These are people who have context, and so it's such an emotional thing to go through, to see someone making a decision that you can't actually change their mind and you can't do anything to save that baby.
And what does it do to you to place a baby in the medical waste bin?
It's just, you just can't even put that into words. I think it's just such a ridiculous idea that that's something that happens, I think. And I think so many people don't know that happens. And if more people knew, it just brings a whole different understanding to it, because it's just, that's a human life. That's a human life that is being so disregarded, not only in being killed, but just being completely disregarded as a life.
Thank you. Thank you for being brave and sharing with us your story, and for really exposing what's going on. And I hope that other nurses and midwives working in the system and doctors, if you have a story to tell, please reach out to me, because we have to share these stories. It's the only way this is going to change. And so I really am calling on the community to speak up and to get in touch, and we will protect your identity like we've done here. But we do need men and women of courage to raise their voices about this, because otherwise it just keeps going on and it keeps getting worse. So thank you so much for coming in today. Okay, thanks.